we're going to talk about China, and we have some amazing insight that should be coming up. The three gentlemen here have spent the latter, probably the same amount of time that we've been going to PTC, 100 plus years combined in and around China. There's a lot going on today, and we're going to talk about how it's impacting the digital infrastructure and just geopolitics in general. But let me turn over to the gentleman to my left, Marc Halbfinger, to give a quick intro, and then we'll pass it down.
Marc Halbfinger, CEO of Console Connect. I see it says here PTC'DC Global. That's what I was running for a while, but in the last few months, rebranded and going through a bit of separation as a result of a transaction, which some of you may have read about. So now CEO of Console Connect.
Justin Mallen, Senior Advisor at Asia Pacific Land. Formerly, I was running build, own, and operate a platform of data centers in China as Silk Road Telecom. I started that some 25, 30 years ago with a closet of servers. So I've seen a bit in China.
And I spoke earlier, Bill Barney. It's actually going back in my career. I think it was for 4 years. I worked for a group called the State Asset Committee in China. It was a submarine cable company called Asia Netcom, which later went on to be actually owned by private equity. But it was the first telecom company that was foreign that was actually bought by the Chinese government. So we actually worked in there, and then went on to various iterations from there.
So a couple things that have changed over the last, I guess, 28 years. I wear glasses now, coming to PTC, and shockingly, this is the first time, and probably the last time you'll see me in a suit. So I don't particularly love wearing suits. My dad's a professor of Chinese history, and he has been for 52 years, so I picked on him by sending me some questions. So I have them here, but we're going to get those into those in a second. I think let's just start by giving just, what's the dynamic today in China and China-U.S. relations, and then a little bit on how that's impacting digital infrastructure, and then I think we can go into some of these more in-depth questions. But I want to start off generally, and then let's get into some more of the detail. So Marc, I'll pass over to you, and then why don't we just chime in? I think also
I thought this is starting with Bill.
Well, this is also meant to be interactive, so if folks want to ask some questions, we can. And I think let's just not keep it a monotone, me speaking all the time. And, these guys are amazing. I was also surprised that usually I have to warn them to only limit their introductions to, below 10 minutes, which was actually impressive that they were able to do that. But let's turn over to Marc. It's all you.
Right, a couple minutes, and it's hard to, I think, get the view. I think probably everyone here has a view or an opinion on the relationship between the PRC and the USA and, in general, what's going on. I think within the context of PTC and everything that's happening in the ICT space, it's probably helpful to understand, of course, that since what China referred to as a period of opening up until, let's say, 2010 to 2012, things were flowing pretty much according to what I would call a Western-style rule-based approach to commerce and the ICT infrastructure as well. I think also China's entry into WTO contributed to a lot of that. But around about 2013, 2014, and Justin probably was there at the time, speaking Chinese and understood, Chinese introduced a policy which was even made public by the Wall Street Journal at one point called IOE, which stood for IBM, Oracle, and EMC. And the Chinese government said, we want to remove instances of those three companies out of the infrastructure. I think that was, from my point of view, the opening signal to the fact that there was going to be change in policy and rule-based structure. I think we also saw efforts by Facebook and others to try and enter China more robustly, which wasn't widely accepted. And so we started to see a separation of that activity. In Hong Kong, where I was operating, things were still quite separate, with what's called one country, two systems, so that you have the Hong Kong commercial system, which is still legally separate. And so for us, operating a global platform, I think we're able to function within that delta of environment by staying arm's length away from China and working through Hong Kong. But as a result of the events that took place in Hong Kong in 2019 and the U.S. decision to withdraw the special recognition of Hong Kong from a commercial point of view, Hong Kong also started to get swept up into the China story. And because a lot of Western access to China, Justin notwithstanding, was often through Hong Kong, I think there started to be a greater feeling, certainly amongst our community, that things were changing there. That also, I think, was a little bit of fuel to the transaction that I'm involved in at the moment, where at the end of the day, we'll be domiciling our corporate activity out of Singapore instead of Hong Kong. I think it's just a general indication of where things are going. I'll just add one last thing. Apologies for being wordy. In 2020, exactly at the point where things are changing, the Chinese Communist Party came forward with an introduction of, within their view of thought, that a new means of production within Marxist concepts was data. So you have land, labor, capital, and I think the US introduced the concepts of entrepreneurship or technology in the 20th century. But in 2020, China said data is a means of production. And that is a harbinger that I think everyone in China and beyond China should be alert to, because it means that everything around the data ecosystem, and that starts with chips, the components to make chips, the connectivity elements, power elements, everything that's there, I think we need to be alert to the fact that from a policy point of view, and it affects also what we in a Western environment might look at even as data privacy, affects every element of that environment. The moment there was a determination that data is a means of production, it was also a guideline for policy behavior going forward. And if you have those background, I think that's perhaps a meaningful basis for discussion.
So really just building on the overview that Marc provided for us, yeah, it was really around 2012, 13 that you could sort of start feeling a sense of change coming. The IOE is not Internet of Things, it is Get Out Internet, IBM, Oracle, and
EMC.
Exactly. And then sort of building on that, the sledgehammer that brought it home was the stopping of the Alipay IPO. And that really came to a forefront when Jack gave a speech at a financial conference and, called out the industry, the financial industry in China, and the rules and order system and the rules that weren't written and the rules that those of us who operated in China sort of knew as the unwritten rules, all gone. From that point forward, the tone of working within China, the opportunities that you used to have in China, and then really the protections or the understood, rules of the road made it a lot more difficult to operate there. I think Marc brought up the idea of data. That really was a growing thought process back then. Alibaba was doing the city brain, and the idea of the city brain was really using an AI or an algorithm to really build efficiencies into how a city operates. From traffic to traffic lights. And then again, that sort of got subsumed by the government for other purposes and other uses. That said, and I'll pass it off to Bill right after this, they did add a new rule around data that you can actually use data to get loans from banks. And I'll bring that up and then I'll close with this. The Chinese government is really trying to reignite that sort of spark by providing additional funding, by opening up loans, by saying all the right things. But again, those actions of previous sort of getting rid of the rules has made it very hard for people to figure out what's coming next. So we may all look like we know what we're talking about. We're kind of also trying to figure it out as everybody else is.
Well, I think, the interesting thing from, a lot of people are saying China's really changed. In some ways, I would tell you certain fundamental things have been there all along. We chose not to look at them. And I think one of the things that's interesting is when we were running the submarine cables, we landed a cable in Qingdao, and the problem was, and when we then were later selling this to private equity, we're dealing with the state-owned enterprise, and the question came up as to who owned what part of the cable, and where did the Chinese border end, right? And this thing, when we talked to the Chinese, was 147 miles offshore, okay, which is at some little series of islands that they all claimed they owned. And then the Americans all were saying, well, no, you only get your 5 miles offshore. And we ended up never being able to resolve And we actually sold the company with the entire thing just opaque, and it was just left there. The Qingdao landing is still to this day not resolved But my point is, this was 2003 when these things were happening. And some of the things also, if you look at, for example, internet transit, okay? We used to pay, in the United States, a carrier would sell internet transit for $1 or $2. If you ever wanted to enter China, you paid $100. Okay, and it was from that. It was actually from 2001 to 2002. So a lot of
we paid a little less. Bill.
PTC'DC pays a lot less, but
So did Tyler.
They know the right people.
But the reality was a lot of the challenges and also the rigid sort of trade situation that exists today actually has existed all along. But we chose to ignore it in some ways and sort of just said, all right, we're trying to do these. We're trying to work together. We're trying to participate together. But the reality was a lot of this stuff that now is being, is making its way all the way up into the press. Reality is it's been there for 20 years, I think.
Well, and I think, you're right. It has been there for 20 years, meaning there were rules that were written down.
Yeah.
I needed to get in bandwidth to my facilities to have a data center that actually worked.
Yeah.
And it was expensive. And they said, this is your list price. This is what you're going to pay. Okay, well, we'll give you a 10% discount. However, if you're getting bandwidth and you're a customer of them, they give you a 90% discount. So clearly, that became a problem until within the industry, everybody would build data centers. We would provide services to Alibaba. However, China Unicom, China Telecom, or China Mobile would be in the middle of that contract. And we did all the work. They would write the paper, they would write the invoices, and then that worked. That's how it used to be. I think those workarounds are coming apart.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, again, this confusion, this trying to figure out what really is the China that we're going to be looking at in 5 years or 2 years.
Yeah, China's always going to be a leader in technology and innovation. And so I think, though, there's a lot of government controls that are going on today, not just in the U.S., but outside. But we're going to have to rely on China for innovation as well. And I think it'd be good to get perspective on, how do you maneuver around the ability not to use China from a growth perspective and from an innovation perspective, keeping in mind there's regulatory, there's compliance, there's going to be the government controls. But why don't we start with Justin to kick that off, since you sort of indicated something there, and then we'll jump in. But I think, again, if the folks in the audience want to jump in, please, ask questions. I want to make sure that we have this, interactive. But,
no, I think, it's a great question, and you preambulated out there. The Chinese are incredible at innovation. They were able to take some, let's put aside the whole IP issues from 20, 25 years ago. They took that, they built on that, and then they've exceeded that. They've gone beyond that. Payment systems within China, wireless payment systems, QR code payment systems in China are top of the line. As I was mentioned earlier, the smart city concept, they really took that in China because they had the data, they were able to use the data, and then they were able to build the algorithms around it, and then able to do that with the government and deploy these smart city models across China. So innovation is great. Your question becomes sort of the how. And then the second part of that question is, what does it look like going forward? I left China about 3 years ago. I still keep in touch with a lot of friends over there. The tone has shifted. So a lot of that sort of go, let's go figure this out, let's make something happen, it's kind of fallen back. A lot of it's become much more state-directed at this stage. But that doesn't mean that the people that were making these great products before are not there. They're still there. That doesn't mean that these companies that were doing great things before are gone. They're still there. So the way I think about it is really engaging and continuing to have dialogues with China is still absolutely and utterly important. But you have to do it with two eyes open. A lot of us went, me included, with one eye open. We knew a lot of the other problems that we were working with. We felt, believed, maybe rightly, probably incorrectly, that it was going in a direction. But you still can't take away the fact that it really is one of the most innovative, driven cultures. I use culture as opposed to country. It's one of the most innovative, driven cultures on the planet. we'll see where this goes.
Bill, any perspective on that?
No, the amazing run that the Chinese had for 15, 20 years in innovation. I lived in what's called the Greater Bay Area, and that was essentially where most of the technology companies worked. And Marc was there with me in Hong Kong. But I think what you saw over that period of time was extraordinary in terms of and I think one of the things, though, as I keep going back to my theme, I think it was very largely state-directed even at that time. The state was a believer in technology. They were a believer in innovation, and they were driving things forward. And I think the one thing that we learned about China is you have to have alignment with the top of the government in order for things to, and you've got a government that thinks differently now for the first time. I think that's somewhat what I think is causing the change here in terms
They also, that was the time that they allowed the entrepreneurs to be successful.
Right.
So it was state-directed. It's still state-directed.
True.
Entrepreneurs are now no longer to be allowed to be successful, or it's a lot more difficult.
It depends on the flow, right?
Yes.
If you take a look at innovation in medical devices or cancer treatment, I think that's untethered, and they're able to do whatever they want. And also, I think that certainly in Europe and even in the United States, there's a welcoming of interaction around that type of innovation. Some of the work that Chinese researchers have done in leukemia, medical devices, actually quite advanced and fascinating, and everyone is enjoying the benefit from that. And in other areas, we saw in COVID, the approach to data management a little bit different than what you would see in the West. So need to think through about what even the balances are when you apply the data associated with those technology evolutions. I think here in this room, a lot of people are more focused on technology innovation around the ICT space. And there's a world there that's designed for the good, and there's a world there which some people in the room here need to be alert to for security reasons. And I think that that's always been clear to me, at least in that regard. And I think it is possible to build a track of relationship with China and its innovative community in an intelligent way. And now that people have seen the concern, then the question is, what is the methodology of engagement? What is the platform? And what are the rules set by both sides of the equation? And that, I think, is still an open issue which parties around the world are trying to work out.
I want to switch gears to investment. And I think this is, we have some folks here from the investment world. We have some folks from the government. But I think, Bill, we'll start with you on, initially, when infrastructure investors were considering OECD, Hong Kong was part of that, and today it's sort of been moved out. But I think it's such a crucial market that we've all talked about innovation and how it can help us drive. Where do you think it goes from here? I mean, how do you get some foreign money coming in, and is there some levity, or is it just or are the regulatory challenges going to continue?
I think you're going to see. Obviously, we're in an election year. And obviously, it's a horse that can be beaten by both sides of the aisle, as they say, in terms of an issue. And I think so. Will things change between the United States government and China in the next 3 months? Probably not. But I actually think things will soften. I think and it was interesting. We all read there's a Condoleezza Rice article that came out about, actually Marc forwarded to us, and which is really helpful in terms of thinking about isolationism and why that's not a good thing. And that's obviously for foreign policy and things like that, but it actually applies to us in the business world as well, which is, sure, we're in this sort of interesting period, but the Chinese are going to play a very, very critical role going forward. You can't ignore them. You can't ignore this part of the world. And whether you're in submarine cables or you're one of the companies that owns data centers here, the reality is we have to work together, and we're going to find a way, and it will. And I think things will soften over time. I think we're at sort of the trough now, and I think a new president coming in on either side, I think, will start to look at this and say, all right, it's in our best interest to have dialogue, and I think that will be part of what happens, and it'll soften over time. But I think we're still it'll be dark, I think, for another 90 days or so before things start to kind of turn in the other direction. And I think it will happen, though. And I think but it'll come with a much stronger position from the United States on things like trade. I think, for example, you're not going to have $100 IP transit rates into China anymore. You're not going to have a lot of these issues in terms of joining the WTO. Look, here are the issues when you're supposed to join the WTO. Now you've actually got to join these things, and you actually got to follow the rules. And I think that'll be kind of the new relationship with China. But I think it'll soften. I think it's in their interest and it's in ours. And I think that's always a reason. I think when both sides need it, I think the reality will be that we will come together.
I think that's super helpful insight in that, it is such an important, and if you look back years and years ago, we were allies, and now it's changed dramatically, obviously.
Well, I appreciate Bill's optimism there. I think he's projecting hope out over this thing. I'm a little bit joy. I'm a little bit more pessimistic because I think China needs to. I completely agree that anything going forward with China right now will be two eyes open.
Yeah.
Landing a cable in Qingdao and not knowing where the country demarcation is probably fine back then, and nowadays it might be something that you need to work through. And within that, then though, I also think is the idea that we absolutely need to maintain that dialogue. We absolutely need to start explaining and really working with Chinese counterparties and explaining sort of the rules of the road. And the laws and what a contract means in more terms that are actually applicable, because I think China now needs to take the opportunity to rebuild credibility. As we get through a period of the next 90 days, a new administration. Yeah, they're moving towards dialogue, but the business community is going to need to see a little bit more. Forefront action on the Chinese side to be comfortable going back in, because again, those rules that were not written now need to be written.
Okay, anything to add?
I'll take the view. I mean, respectfully to my two colleagues, both have the title former at the moment, and
Absolutely.
I'm still kicking and pushing.
Jeez, that's low, man.
What's that?
You definitely are.
But yeah, I'm older than
You better be
I
good
know.
at this.
But I
You're
think
still
that,
looking good, though.
Yeah, the story there, I think, then is taking the optimism that Bill offers and the potential pessimism that Justin is proposing. I think that to argue from my old international relations days, you have to take a bit of a realpolitik perspective and say, okay, how do we deal pragmatically with what we're doing? From my perspective, it's as managing a company. Interestingly, the transaction that we're involved in shifts the sphere of influence from Hong Kong to, let's say, more New Zealand, Western-oriented ownership structure. And so that's new ground that needs to be charted. How do you do that? Bill, in his opening remarks, used the word refile. I don't think he even remembered, but it threw me back nostalgic to the way our regulatory teams would behave. In the days of when we were trying to deal with ITU, we would take a look at what we understood to be the rules, and we would try and understand how we would bypass them. That was what the regulatory guys did in the day. And then during the heydays of what was globalization and activity, people just ran rampant and did pretty much what they wanted. I think that now, in order to deal with whether it's the optimism or the pessimism, without the rule base built, and considering also what was said in the previous panel around subsea, particularly on the regulatory side, we need to really embrace the regulatory story inside companies. That involves making sure that we're compliant, because there might be issues around data privacy in one location, because I alluded to the story of data at the beginning, but it may be security, that enterprises may not be completely familiar with jurisdictional requirements might be around security. And I think we need to make sure that we're embracing that in every jurisdiction in which we function. And when you deal with a company that I'm doing with now, which has so many different jurisdictions of involvement, it can sometimes be perplexing, but it needs to be embraced, because the environment worldwide is changing. Compliance, data privacy, data security, management, understanding foreign interests in different locations, which may be problematic for one jurisdiction to another. We cannot put our heads in the sand as service providers. We have to really work hard to make sure that we're having the dialogue with the regulator and extracting compliance as opposed to what we did in the days of refile to try and figure out how to go around it. That would be my message to everybody in the room.
Mark, organizationally, how would you set your company up? What changes are you making with the changes that you're seeing today? Maybe you can kind of walk us through that. That'd be helpful.
Yeah. Well, number one is, our historical domicile was as a corporate anchor was a mix of Hong Kong, U.S., UK, Netherlands for tax reasons. We've chosen now to do something different, which is to set up the global headquarters in Singapore. We view that as a location that's meaningful, certainly in Asia, but because we operate globally, we think it's meaningful there. We continue to shy away from certain countries, respectfully, like India, because of our concerns around tax, or Brazil around withholding and so on. And then we'll take a look at the regulatory environments and say, are these areas that we operate in? So in PRC, we've never operated. We've always had our demarcation point in Hong Kong, and now we're going to restructure organizationally to have our demarcation points. We'll have access there, but we'll move it out a little bit further into the Asia Pacific area. That's number one. Number two.
Can I ask about one other thing just to add in would be helpful is.
You're going to make me lose my train of
I
thought,
know,
but okay, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
So you do that to me regularly.
I do.
Go on.
Can you also touch on what you alluded to before? Would you be beefing up your regulatory cybersecurity department?
That was exactly the next thing.
Perfect.
So thank you. You helped me
It's a
out.
great lead in. Here's a softball.
Well prompted.
So at the moment, we're not staffed up enough on the regulatory side, and apologies to our attorneys who we pay a good amount, but the objective is to build out a group of regulatory compliance people that will also be closely aligned, believe it or not, to our marketing environment, to make sure that whatever we're doing, whatever feature we're building on the platform, whatever network component we're delivering, that we're also able to feel 100% comfortable and convey that with our internal communications and messaging about how we're operating. That means really staffing up on a regulatory side, not just in order to comply with rules and regs associated with the license here in the United States or the one in Singapore, but wherever we may go, and to deal with that quite aggressively. And so in the business case, post completion of where we are identifying headcount for that, and we'll be growing that value. But it's a set of skill sets, some of them which today still don't really exist, in my view, because it's a mix. In some jurisdictions, you have to look at data privacy. In others, you have to look at security of equipment and so on. A quick funny one, if you will allow me. A few months ago, I get a call from the guys.
It better be funny.
Escalated. Well, you'll find it interesting. Escalated to the guys, and they say, Mark, we got equipment that we're supposed to provision in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that got blocked, and the customs guys are throwing it out. I say, well, why? Didn't we go through our regular process of export compliance? He said, yeah, we did. I said, so what is it? He said, Saudi Arabia won't take any Chinese-made equipment. I said, I thought we're not doing any Chinese-made equipment. He says, no, it's Cisco. Cisco was blocked at the Saudi border because the parts from, I see that's not funny to anyone. Because
it was funny.
It might have been funny at a different
I thought it was funny.
It was funny.
And in fact, the Cisco equipment, which we thought was clean and had passed muster with our export compliance team here in Virginia, for the Saudis, wasn't okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
Although Saudi's doing that really big AI deal. Is that Saudi? A24, A1, that's backed by Chinese money? Microsoft? Sorry. I digress.
If you want to talk to Justin about that after, please find him.
If someone wants to correct me, please.
I think there's something that's quite interesting. I used to be, I don't know how I made it into this industry, but I used to be in the district attorney, U.S. attorney's office, and crimes at that time were, petty crimes and people from New York City. But I recently met with some of my colleagues from there who are still there, and the amount of money that's been poured into the cyber unit there, which I think is going to impact everybody in this room, that has to do with, obviously, because cyber crimes go over our networks and go through our data centers. But the petty thieves are being removed from the streets because they're sitting behind computers now.
Yeah.
And so there's been a dramatic shift that I think will impact this. And I imagine, a lot of it is coming from outside the U.S., and I think we'll continue to see that. Not, focusing on China, but I think it's going to be an interesting piece as you bring up the idea of beefing up your cyber, group. I think it's going to be super important from a go forward.
Compliance group. We call it
Compliance. Sorry.
But
It's just compliance, because you're very compliant.
I do my best.
So I'm going to ask a question from my dad, which which is.
Is he online right now, or?
He's not online. He actually just texted me with it. No, but his question is, and I think this is actually quite relevant from kind of where we go, but the number of U.S. college students studying the Chinese language, and Justin, we'll start with you, has considerably decreased, partly because of the present negative attitudes toward China. What should we be doing about it? Because I think that was the area that you spent a lot of time in China. You majored in Chinese, and
Absolutely. I was one of those college students. 1990, 91 was my junior year abroad in Beijing and then in Taiwan. And back then there were probably, the number I heard I think was 2023 was like less than 500 U.S. students studying in China. I can't imagine what that's like, because I think when I was there in 1991, it was about that same number. And it felt obviously like a foreign world, and it really was that far back within China. But it was great. It was phenomenal. And we all talk about the issues that we're seeing in China, and I've lived them, and we all need to be aware of them. And I went again at that point just wide-eyed and really excited about being there. Went and did business there. Again, that's to the one eye open, one eye closed. I kind of sort of knew the issues that I probably would run into. And now you need to be, two eyes wide open when you're going there. But it all comes back to, again, the culture, the people, the innovation, the drive, the technologists, the intelligence, everything around there about China has not changed. That culture is still there. So finding a way to you can't make China cool again, but that the importance of that dialogue and the importance of people being in and out of China and the importance of students going to China and then helping us understand, where we're going forward with China, I think is still critical. And I don't have an answer as to how.
I think the other thing it's interesting, because I have three sons, all that were sort of there during the heyday of China, and two of them were fluent in Chinese, and that was the thing to do. You had your kids learn Mandarin, and that was when you're in Hong Kong. And the interesting thing is, I'm as I continue to be positive, I think that generation, there was a lot of people that actually engaged in China, and I think everyone's from both sides. Whether you looked at Chinese coming here to take, to go to college in the United States and vice versa, and I think. That communication hasn't disappeared. And I think those people, and essentially my sons has got close colleagues in mainland China, and they've got friends for life. And it's interesting. I actually think that will actually drive us forward in many ways, because I think it is that fact that we've got so many Americans now that speak Mandarin. Yes, it's no longer the cool thing to do in a school in Hong Kong if you're an American, but it was for 20 years. And so you got 20 years of sort of, and even at the university level, I think there was about 15 years there where every university, that was like the number one language to learn was Mandarin, right? And it's so we've made some positive steps that I think will help us in the long run, working together with China. But obviously it's going to be a slog. It's
going to be a bumpy road.
But I think there's a lot of things that are in place right now that actually weren't there 25 years ago that I think will help us in that.
No, it's good. It's good to hear. I think from my own perspective, I've seen my daughter's been taking Mandarin for the last 5 years. When I was in elementary and high school, the offering was Latin, Spanish, or French. Now Latin's obviously gone by the wayside. Maybe that's why SAT scores have gone down. But I do think that it's good to hear that there is hope, and that because I think the idea of not being able to communicate is going to be a hindrance. In every sector, but specifically in this one.
I think more importantly, if you take China off the map, and we don't,
that's right.
We don't take our best efforts to
100%.
to keep that dialogue, to keep that work going. I mean, the consequences of that are even worse.
So I have another question from Dr. Wasabi. This is the Chinese government is currently pouring money into technology education. For example, Shanghai Tech, which was founded 12 years ago, is modeled on Caltech and has a world-class facility. Should the U.S. government devote more resources to match China, or should we focus on private donations to technology institutions?
I've actually been to that place, so it's an interesting. The thing I would say is, I don't think the U.S. government has to do anything. To be honest with you, it's very interesting. You go to a Chinese research center, and you go to an American research center. You go to Google, or you go to Microsoft. And the thing that's amazing, I find, which I think is the reason why the United States is always going to lead. You go there and you sit in a room. You go to the cafeteria at Google, and there's every nationality. There's men, there's women, there are people from Iran, they're from India, they're from all over the world. And they don't see race, they don't see anything, they just see smart people. And they all operate there. You go to a Chinese research center, they're all Chinese. And yes, there is diversity in China itself, but it is very much a single education system feeding into a research. We're getting a melting pot from all over the world that actually sits in these research centers. And I think that will always be what drives us and makes us a better place, I think, in terms of new technologies. And I know we always fear the Chinese, but I think the fact that America is able to do that and that we have companies that do this at their own free will, I think is a pretty amazing thing. And it's also the thing that I've always said to the Chinese when I've been there. I was like, the problem that you have is you do not have diversity. You do not have, across your workforce. You don't actually bring in outsiders. There's no foreigners there. There's no one from the outside giving you different perspectives. And I think that's one of the things that's always going to make us great and is always going to be a challenge for them going forward.
Yeah, I think also if you go back to what I was saying in terms of the means of production, the universities, wherever they may be, are providing the baseline for technology evolution through innovation. And the linkage that exists in a capitalist system to innovation is quite significant. You're able to tie financial incentive with a view of what's necessary and to develop that value. That's quite meaningful. When the determination of what is necessary is determined hierarchically, it doesn't work as effectively over time. And I think that China got that for a while, and now I think there's, as Justin alluded to, I think there's a bit of a shift in that regard. But I think we also need to be alert to the fact that whenever we invite anyone in, as Bill is saying, those ideas can also be exported, and so that we need to understand, what does that mean? There's a value for innovation, and there can be a concern for other areas. There's a balance. I don't like the word balance, but I think that you need to be looking at all sides as you invite people into your universities or your technology centers in order to make sure that there's attention to detail. Once upon a time, militaries would be charged with guarding oil rigs in the sea, and now there needs to be attention to the next side of the means of production, which is data.
Want to just continue with education. The U.S. has actually taken a bit of a stance in terms of admitting mainland Chinese students into the universities, which could be a challenge from a go forward. And I just want to get some perspective on that. I mean, to me that seems a bit, pig-headed. And I think we should probably, sort of, and I know I'm getting into sort of the political aspect of it, but it would just be good to get perspective on that. Bill, do you want to start?
No, I think we should open the doors. I think, to be honest, I think the only way the American system and democracy work is if people actually get to come and experience it, and the more people. Because the amazing thing is when I worked for the Chinese, and it was about 3 or 4 years there, the dialogue that you had below the government, they're very, and Justin, I think, will tell you the same thing. Almost the same interactions you have with your American friends and things like that. They think about all the similar things. They, everything that concerns you as a 25 or 30-year-old here in America, they have the same concerns in China. And I think that there's obviously the government that's happening up here, but the reality is it's sort of the population, the general population is trying to progress forward, just like we are. And I think, I think opening the doors and having as many Chinese come in to America to participate in our universities, I think isolation is the wrong answer. I think it's they should bring everyone, and it doesn't mean just Chinese, but I think what's great about America is allowing people to come here to go to school, and that's also what makes our universities great. Absolutely.
I absolutely echo that. And I taking it one step further, there will be bad actors. Period. We know that. It's going to happen. But after 30 years in China, 99.999, 5 nines, let's just go with 5. Let's call it 6 nines, right? They're good. And the greater risk is actually when they go back to China. And it's not a risk for us, it's actually a risk for the government, because you are right. And Mark is absolutely right. A top-down hierarchical strategy on how to build chipsets and tech, and it's all being managed by career government officials. They're given a mandate, they're given a KPI, they need to hit that target, they will find a way to hit that target regardless of how it's actually accomplished or whether or not it's accomplished. But the more Chinese students that you have that learn here, that go back, that then talk about the ideas and have those conversations and start pushing that needle forward will only benefit us, even with the 0.001% of bad actors.
And that?
I'll just summarize. I'll say, from what Justin is saying, look, effectively, he alluded to the fact that the economy there is organized, and there still is private enterprise in China that does meaningful, but primarily the 20 primary metro jurisdictions, let's say, in which China is organized, and then the economies that are sit with the state-owned enterprise. Justin used the word. They're given targets, and almost like companies, and you gotta make those targets, right? And so, maybe one sales guy is going to argue with another sales guy about whose target it was, and so on. And interestingly, in the way that let's call it a Western capitalist-based society is organized, those targets you might see lots of graphs on Bloomberg's, but the targets are much more freely allocated, let's say. And that gives you an openness, and that is the delta. So you have two different styles of economic organization, and those two different styles are now having a dialogue or a rivalry or whatever you want to call it with regard to what are the rules of order in the global society that's being moved around by data. And that data has value, and the data has security concerns. And so that's pretty much the story. And what Bill was saying is that Condoleezza Rice's article is saying, whatever that is, we need to be alert to it, all of us, and to engage so that isolationism doesn't become a dearth to us, and instead that we're able to do that. Engagement means what these two guys are saying, yes, bring them in and see what the dialogue is and understand the other society. There's a fine line difference between security issues and getting to a point of xenophobia. And I urge caution about the latter while paying attention to the former. That's it.
I want to pause and see if there's any questions from folks here in the audience.
Well, first of all, this was a terrific panel. I was taking notes like crazy, and so we really appreciate your personal and business perspective, so thank you very much for organizing that. Question I have has to do with the apparent view that the Chinese have and that we have about internet. Now, I believe that connectivity is everything. In the absence of connectivity, the internet doesn't work. And yet, some policymakers are taking the view that anything that's Chinese is polluted, and we should disconnect from it. You mentioned this about the Cisco situation, for example. But some of them are even saying, well, if you connect to any piece of the internet that's connected to some part of China, then that's bad and it's harmful and it's awful. And I wonder, first of all, is that an attitude that you detect as well? Maybe I'm just the only guy who's thinking that. But the second thing is I think that's so inimical to the value of the internet and all the other things that rely on it. How do we undo that if, in fact, you agree with me that this attitude that it's all polluted and it's all dangerous and it's all harmful? This gets to your 99.999 question. If that's a problem, what should we do about it? How do we convince people otherwise? So there.
Sure, that's an easy question.
I can't believe I'm going to try and answer a question from Vince Cerf when I was always asking him questions. But that's, the internet that you helped create was born in a time of perspective where people were looking with a really globalized view and a common set of values. And I think in my answer to the last question, I was perhaps not identifying different values, but different sets of economic organization, which lead to different institutional perspectives. I'm hopeful, as Bill is defining optimism, that we will get to a point that what you had defined just now, we'll get to it. At the moment, we're experiencing a period where that may not be the case, because I think everyone has now come to understand both the positive power of the internet and the potential challenges to jurisdictional management of security issues. I don't want to say control, but management of security issues. And I think that it's a generational thing that will get to a next stage. AI and the impacts of it, I think, are stirring the pot as to what's going to happen. Large language models will probably take on some of the values, virtues, and ethics of the societies of the jurisdictions in which they're managed. If I ask your Gemini model question X, and then I put the same question on the Baidu large language model, I'm going to get a much different answer, because the inputs are there and they're being influenced by the ethics and values and that are plowing into that environment. How then, so it may no longer be about connectivity. It may now be about the applicational impact of all of the data that's flowing over that connectivity. And that's the stage that we're at. In my view, I have no crystal ball. I'm hopeful that we'll get to a universal view that makes sense. At the moment, what appears to me that's going on is that different jurisdictions are putting forward the rules. And a comment about China, because Bill alluded to it, on IP transit, charging $100 a meg, poor guy that he paid that. But I think that the point there was that China always kept control of the data inside the jurisdictional boundaries of China. The purpose of paying China Unicom and China Telecom IP transit fees, and for them not joining the tier one status of all the other service providers that were tier one, like ourselves, was that they wanted to make sure that their data was kept there. They saw that writing on the wall. And now what we're seeing as a result of data proliferation and concerns about security is that Western environments are starting to look at that same model in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to throw a different question back at you. My concern is, I see now Western governments saying that they want to tax data. So that's the next stage, right?
I'm hesitant to say what I'm thinking when you mention taxing data, so I won't, because it's not suitable for public audiences. Let me come back, though, to respond to your observation about control of data. First of all, thinking that because it's inside a particular geopolitical jurisdiction makes it safer or more secure is nonsense. It's not true. In fact, if you want to protect information, the right thing to do is to encrypt it and make sure the keys only go to the people that you want to have access to it.
That's right.
And so disconnecting is not a solution to the worry about content.
I didn't say disconnect. I said governments are saying they disconnect, but the issue from my point of view is the. It's okay. You can. I've been accused of many things. Don't worry about it.
I'll think of something to accuse you of, but that wasn't it. But what you suggested was that some countries are saying disconnecting is the solution to the problem of bad data. And I don't think that's exactly right. The solution to the bad data is figuring out that it's bad data and figuring out how to detect that it is and then reject it. But your question now is the taxation one. This is yet another way of interfering with the value of allowing people to have broad access to information. And the taxation is a way of inhibiting that. I don't think that it is going to achieve its objective. The only thing it will do is end up ruining the value of this broad access to content if it interferes with the ability to move data from place to place, or if it interferes with connectivity. So for whatever reason the Chinese or others want to apply this tax, the rationale is in my view, harmful to a long-term value. And we see the same thing happening in South Korea, for example, where the assertion is made that somehow or other the presence of the application service providers is forcing information on the population. It's kind of like being an electrical power generation company forcing electrons into your house. And the real answer is you turn the damn light on and it was sucking electrons. The people in South Korea are demanding access to the data. They're not being forced to take it. So the argument that is being made there, I think, is questionable. I don't know if that answers your question, but it was fun to interfere with the panel anyway.
I think he took over, Don.
He did. He did a great job taking over. Are there any other questions? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great panel. Just one note. One further note, just Marc is wearing Console Connect socks. So if you want a pair, he's doing a great job advertising for his company. So.
We didn't bring any this time.
Okay, so he didn't bring any. He can send you some.
Next
Thank
time,
you very
let us
much.
know.
Enjoy the rest of
Thank you.
PTC.
Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye.